everyone, and glad you made it to the final talk. So we'll be talking today about Waypoint as a Mini-PaaS. About me, I'm working as a Director of Technical Evangelism at Civo, building the next-gen cloud platform. So we provide managed Kubernetes based on K3s. And I'm a CNCF ambassador, and I love to be in the community. So I have a YouTube channel, very active on Twitter, run my own community called Cube Simplify, again, for simplifying cloud native. So you can kind of connect with me everywhere. So before we start or we understand what Waypoint actually is, let's try to understand the current ecosystem, the current workflow which is there. So currently, as a developer, you write code because you need to have that code to be deployed to somewhere, and there are various platforms for that. You have Nomad, you have Google Cloud Run, you have EC2 instances, you have Kubernetes. So there are various platforms, and for each platform, there are various toolings that can be used for different stages. So after you have written your code and you have thought to deploy that, you will be using different toolings like Packer for EC2, Docker if you want for containerization, and even build packs for containerization, gcloud build if you want to do it on Cloud Run. And same pattern is getting followed for the other stages as well. For deployment, you either use kubectl, apply, create, or Helm for your Kubernetes stuff, and then gcloud run again, or Terraform for the deploy things. And then again for the release one, like you need to create ingresses and all these things. So that is the current workflow that people have their own set of platforms, people have their own set of toolings and own set of workflows for building, deploying, and releasing their application after they have written the code, which they actually want to see what exactly it does. So now where Waypoint fits is exactly in that umbrella, that you can have a single file that can define what your application should look like, and you should be able to deploy that application onto different platforms. So you can deploy using a single command called Waypoint up to different platforms like Lambda, Kubernetes, Nomad, Docker. So your tooling has become one. So you are only using Waypoint now for deploying, building, and releasing, deploying, and releasing your application to different platforms. So everything you will be defining in the waypoint.htcl file. That is the structure. We'll be discussing that more later on, but that's where Waypoint fits in. So what is Waypoint? It describes your development to production workflows in a single file. It works with different platforms like Kubernetes, ECS, and Nomad, and Cloud Run, and many other plugins. Easy to build, deploy, release application. There are each stanzas in the waypoint.htcl file, which we'll be discussing. And then it can be integrated with your CI/CD pipelines, with your GitLab, your GitHub Actions. All these things can be used. And it gives you a PaaS-like experience because you have your code and you have your waypoint.htcl file. You did a Waypoint up, and then you got a URL which you can access your application. So that sort of PaaS-like experience, that's why it is a mini-PaaS. So it gives you a small PaaS-like experience where you just define your application, and we'll be talking more how even that can be taken away from the developer, and developer can seamlessly use some of the things and directly get to the URL with Waypoint. So why Waypoint? Now consider of a scenario that as a developer, you want to deploy your application to a Kubernetes cluster. So obviously, you need a Kubernetes cluster. So let's say you got a Civo Kubernetes cluster or any Kubernetes cluster. After that, you need to understand first about all the Kubernetes objects. You need to understand what a pod means, what a deployment means, what a service means, what a replica set means, what ingress means. Why? Because when you want to deploy your application, you will be deploying it as a deployment. So you create the deployment object, and then you expose it as a service. And then if you want to expose it to the outside world, you have your ingress controller. You need to create an ingress for that. So as a developer, I need to understand all that ecosystem, the heavy ecosystem, and this is just Kubernetes. For other applications, you might be using something else. So I need to understand all those objects and create those objects for getting my code to URL thing. for actually deploying my application and releasing it using the ingress. So I need to understand that. So there's a huge learning curve. And then there are many platforms, as I've discussed earlier, Docker, Packer, Terraform, Kubernetes, Nomad, that you need to learn. But developers just need to deploy. So we should not care about where it is going and what all resources it is creating. Let Waypoint create all the resources. Some of the features of Waypoint, again, first one and the foremost, there's a single file where you will be writing your build, deploy, and release stanzas, and where you will be actually defining how your application is going to build and then deploy, where it is going to be deployed, and then how it will be releasing. GitOps enabled. So that is a very good feature that when you have a UI or from the CLI as well, you create a new project, you can enable the GitOps workflow where when you have the GitHub repository connected, on every push to the main or whatever branch you have configured, it will trigger the same Waypoint up workflow. So that GitOps enabled stuff is very good. Integration with the current tooling with GitLab CI, GitHub Actions, Jenkins, all these things. Teams collaboration. There is a OIDC login, so you can use your same SSO stuff to log into the Waypoint and use that. Easy rollbacks. Application configuration, you can change the config maps and things, and the pod restarts will happen. And three main things after deploying your application you need to see whether your application is running, so you need the logs. You need to see whether something is there on the system or something like that, so you need the exec. And another fancy add-on is the Waypoint UI, which again eases out, if you are a UI person or if you want to do from the UI. You can do everything from the CLI, but there is a fancy UI that helps you even ease down your deployment process or your whole workflow, build, deploy, release. Next, the architecture. So how Waypoint works is, so you have to have a Waypoint CLI downloaded to your local machine. So you'll be having a Waypoint CLI. Then you will be installing the server, or you'll be doing the Waypoint install command onto the platform. So when you do, let's say you take the example of Kubernetes in this case. So when you do Waypoint install -- platform as Kubernetes, it will be installing a stateful set, it will be installing the runner, it will be installing the entry point. So entry point is basically for getting, the logs, the exec things, and then Waypoint runner is the actual, actual pod basically that will be running your build, deploy workflows. But the runner most of the times will be the CLI. So that's the very high level architecture of what Waypoint is, of the Waypoint with respect to Kubernetes. Now again, another very interesting concept that Waypoint introduces is the concept of plugins. So like Kubernetes got a lot of adoption because of the customizations that you can do, because of the extensibility of Kubernetes that you can do. The same thing is with the plugin features of Waypoint. So you can create your own plugins, and then there are built-in plugins. So as you can see, you have pack, like for the cloud native build packs, you can build your application using packs. You can build your application using Docker. You can use Docker as the registry for your artifacts that will be getting generated. You can also use Docker as the platform. So when you are developing locally, you can actually deploy to Docker. So in the deploy, you can give that platform. You can use Nomad as the platform. You can use Kubernetes as the platform. You can use Helm to deploy the applications. So all these, and you can use Vault for reading the configurations from it. So it makes simple to use these built-in plugins. But again, there can be various different kind of specific use cases for which you might need to create your own plugin. You can do that. So you can actually create your own plugin. On the right, if you see, that's the list of the existing plugin, the Azure ACI, Google Cloud Run, AWS Lambda. So you can see all the platform support that it is having where it can be deployed to. So we have talked about Waypoint, all the good features, what it is. It provides a lot of things, but how you can use it. Like you are here to learn, like, okay, I understand now what Waypoint is. It is solving the build, deploy, release thing, but how exactly you will use it, because that is something which is which is missing, that the scenarios. So I have created some scenarios that can give you today some of the information where you can actually use Waypoint. I mean, you can go back and actually use Waypoint for your application for different kind of scenarios. So let's talk about scenario 1. So scenario 1 is code to Kubernetes. So as a developer, the developer has written the code. And then obviously you need a waypoint.html file. So in the waypoint.html file, you have defined the dynamic variables from the secret. So if you can see, there is a variable password with the dynamic Kubernetes. The name represents here of the secret name. So that will be the Kubernetes secret that you'll be creating, or your SRE team will be creating for you, and will be giving you the name for that. And the key is the actual password. Now this, and sensitive, true, all these information. So this you will be using in your registry. So if you go to the build part of that, so it has used the pack, which is the build packs. So it is using build packs for building the artifact for your application. And the next portion is the registry. So it is using Docker as the registry, where you have to give the username and the password, and the password is coming from that variable. So this is the use case. Like you are defining a bunch of things. You are all using a variable, you are using a Kubernetes secret, all these things. And then on the deploy, you have used Kubernetes and you haven't defined anything. So you have said, I want to deploy this application to Kubernetes with this port. That's it. You create the deployment, you create the pod, you create the service, and all these things Waypoint should handle. I don't know any terminology. I'll give you the service port and I'll give you where to deploy it. And that's what is there. It's deployment, use Kubernetes service port 3000. And then in the releasing, I want to release it as an ingress. So I have given, you can use load balancer and all these things as well, but I have given an ingress where we specify like which is the path type for that, and it will automatically create an ingress resource for you inside the Kubernetes cluster once you do Waypoint up. So with this scenario, you have reached, like you have a simple application, simple stateless application, you have reached from code to Kubernetes. So this is scenario 1. Let's go to scenario 2. Often you would need a database with your application. So for that, you will be creating an application. You will be having, let's say, any external database that you want to connect to, and you will be using those database connection strings in your code. So how you can do that? You can specify that inside the configurations. So those are the internal configuration where you have the Mini-PaaS. And again, it is a Kubernetes secret. And in the env section, we are defining something that can be actually used inside your code. So, and these secrets again can be created by the SRE team. So they'll be creating that server, creating the secret, just giving you the names and the details that you can use. So as a developer, your efforts get reduced, because again, if you only have to manage everything, creation of secrets, then you can learn other concepts as well. So you want to stay away from the creation of Kubernetes things. So that's where the scenario 2, where you can create the application, have an external database, and deploy an app with DB connected using Waypoint. Rest of the steps will kind of be similar to the previous scenario, but this is the add-on. Scenario 3, now we are leveling up. So often what happens is there are many Kubernetes resources that your SRE team wants you to deploy. So your SRE, I mean, it's not only just a simple YAML file. There are like bunch of other YAML files that needs to be deployed along with your application. So what happens is you can use a Kubernetes apply plugin and give the path which is told by your SRE team that, there is a k8s folder. It has everything that you need to deploy. So you just define the k8s folder inside the Waypoint.html file, and the kubectl apply will apply all the, so it's basically a kubectl apply -f of all the files inside that folder. And in the container section of that, you can actually define, you can use the artifacts from the build and push stages, because you need the images that you created. You need the images that you have created from the build and build stages. So you can use that using containers and using, the artifact.image. and then in the env you can put all these things. So that will give, I mean, developer do not again have to create the manifests, and they'll be able to deploy the additional manifests that are needed, and you're all happy. The developer only focuses on code and just to waypoint up, and their application is deployed with all the other files that are needed to be on that Kubernetes cluster before you actually deploy something. Scenario 4. So scenario 4 is basically you have current CI/CD ecosystem. You have your current CI systems which is already existing. You have written the code for that and you have written tests for that. What you can do in your existing CI systems is you can actually open a shell and have Waypoint and use Waypoint to deploy your application. You can do that, but I'll come in one of the challenges that why you cannot also do that in the complex pipeline ecosystem. Okay, let's see a kind of more wider scenario with much broader team aspects. So now you are starting off with a new project, and you have your infrastructure team, you have your security team, and you plan to use Waypoint to deploy your application, and you want to give minimum pressure to the developer for understanding the whole platform ecosystem. So your infrastructure team will be setting up infra where your application will run, and they will give you the Waypoint file templates. Now this is very interesting. So as a developer, I don't even want to write the Waypoint files. So if the infrastructure teams are there and they are able to give me the Waypoint templates, Waypoint file templates that can be easily used by me, and I just need to configure maybe some variables or maybe edit the domains and things like that, then I can only focus on writing the code and use those templates which are created by the SRE team. And the SSO, the HTTPS and all these things can be handled by the security team, and developer can enable GitOps workflow. So that is a kind of more enhanced scenario where you have different set of teams and you will be able to use your templates and then deploy to Kubernetes or the other platforms. So we have talked again about scenarios that it can be used. Let's talk about some of the current challenges. How much control? So we say that, okay, developer can deploy your application from development to production very easily. But how much control is enough to be given to a developer to actually deploy to production? Let's say that there is an application where where your application is deployed and it is running 10 replicas of your application because you need 10 replicas with respect to the traffic. But developer does not know that. And they have the pipeline set up to deploy to production. And they say, oh, why there are 10 replicas? Let me just put it to 2 replicas. And boom, your production is gone. So that's where it comes, like how much control is enough and how much control should actually be given to the developers for deploying. Should we only be giving the templates and restrict some of the access that they need to deploy to Kubernetes or exec into a pod, and all these level of access? Should they be given that? That is one of the challenges. Next one, which I was telling, the existing ecosystem. For a new project, it is very much recommended that you can follow any of the above scenarios and you can create your Waypoint file and you will be able to deploy your application. But in the existing applications that the enterprises are having, they have written complex pipelines. And those complex pipelines are not that easy to replace with a tool because of various factors, because of security reasons, security audits, because of the SRE time that will be needed to, to regenerate everything, test out everything with Waypoint and then do that. So in these kind of complex pipeline scenarios, Waypoint can be used in the development, in my opinion, but not in the production as it is, because there are, like, those complex pipelines exist for a reason. I know they might be using some of the previous generation of technologies and not the newer one. But again, it does exist because it solves very complex use cases, and that's where Waypoint won't be able to fit in and do its job. Basically, the SRE team efforts and the security audits. Some of the other challenges is security. Like, how do you securely deploy? As a developer, it's kind of difficult, so you need to have a team that understands how the infrastructure is getting provisioned, how the software is getting provisioned, and they can give you the Waypoint URL. That is something that can be done, but as a developer, it becomes a little bit challenging for that. Scaling, how do we scale with teams? Let's say you have one application or one person developing one application. You are changing or you are deploying that application to production, but there are other teams who are using that product, and it might break one of the other products as well. So how do we scale Waypoint with teams? Dependent microservices. So like, it's a one Waypoint, one app kind of architecture, but what if different microservices are dependent on each other? How do we tackle those kind of scenarios? Because there are scenarios for that. Native stateful sets. We saw a good scenario where we have a database that is provisioned. We used its credentials, and we have taken that. But what about the native stateful sets? Because Kubernetes is not only now for stateless application. People do deploy stateful sets as well. So that native support is also the current challenges. But we have talked about challenges. But if you see the graph of how Waypoint has been increasing, like the number of features that Waypoint is introducing based on these challenges and some of the other challenges that people have tried and given the feedback with respect to all the challenges they've faced to the community, to HashiCorp. So the HashiCorp team has taken that feedback and slowly, if you see in each version, has developed something interesting. So you see with Waypoint 7, you got major UI updates, triggers, workspace scope config, data fetching, OIDC, which is required when you are developing with Waypoint. With 0.8, you got secret values for input variables. That's a very good feature, and it enables some of the use cases, some of the scenarios that I showed today. If this was not there, then again, some of the scenarios would have reduced from the slides. Waypoint job, targetable runners. Waypoint 9 introduced Waypoint task, one file, one app. And recently, I think a couple of 3 weeks back, HashiCorp released Waypoint 0.10. It does introduce custom pipelines, which can, in a way, solve some of the complex pipeline thing that I was talking about. But I haven't tried the custom pipelines, so we need to try that. But yeah, they are working on the custom pipelines, which will be used for the complex use cases. So that is where, again, people have told these are the challenges. Waypoint team is building on that. The project destroy and the Waypoint HCL interactive generator. So I was talking like why, as a developer, you need to write Waypoint. So that's where now with 0.10, you get a Waypoint interactive generator. You can generate a skeleton of your Waypoint.htcl file, and then you need to kind of just do a minor edits in that, and you should be good. So I think, so you can see that the project is solving the right problem. The project is going in the right direction, and it is getting all the features based on the feedback, based on what people are using, and all the scenarios that I talked about can be used. All the current challenges, some of them are already in progress. Some of them you can see in 0.10 that can be tried and see if any of the challenges that I spoke are already been catered. So demo. So in this particular demo, what we'll be seeing is we'll be having a GitHub repository, and we'll be having obviously the Waypoint.htcl file, without which you cannot do the Waypoint up. And you'll be using, again, 3 standard stanzas of build, deploy, and release. For build, we'll be using pack. For deploy, Kubernetes, and for release, also Kubernetes. So the demo will be kind of fast forward, so you need to pay attention. So this is the repository, HashiCorp repository that is being used. But before that, we need to create Kubernetes cluster. So we'll be creating a Civo Kubernetes cluster. with the command co. I'm using co CLI. You can use the UI. COK3S create waypoint and removing the application, and I am installing a CO traffic and cert manager. So basically what it is doing is it is creating a 3-node Kubernetes cluster with traffic load balancer and cert manager pre-installed so that we can use it for certificates later on. And when you come to the UI, you refresh, you'll be seeing that waypoint cluster is already being created. Let's come back to the repository. So this repository is a simple application with Stripe integration. So it does have a use case that is the application with Stripe integration. It has some Kubernetes components to be deployed. It has a server.js file. And in that server.js file, if you see, we are using some of the environment variables, Stripe secret key, Stripe public key, domain variable that we'll be using in the Waypoint HCL file. And these are the Kubernetes components. So we'll be generating the cluster issuer because we have cert manager. We'll be using certificate. We'll be using some role and role bindings for the Waypoint service account to read the secrets. And then comes the main player, which is the Waypoint.htcl. It has the standard configurations, not that much big. You can see that. So it has the build stanza and the deploy and the release. So all 3 small stanzas which are there. So that's the repository and that's the project. Now let's go back to our Waypoint cluster that we created. So if we see, we'll be able to see that the cluster is pretty much getting ready. I know it will get ready. So one node is ready and second and then the third one. And you can see our cluster is up and running in 1 minute 44 seconds, which is decent, which is good, under 2-minute Kubernetes cluster. Now let's grab the kubeconfig file so that we can actually interact with the cluster, or actually not Waypoint interacts to lets it components installed on that. So we are just using CO again CLI to get the kubeconfig file, saving it locally on my system, and now we'll be using the same path and exposing the kubeconfig variable so that when we use Waypoint, we'll be able to use this kubeconfig. So kubectl get nodes, you can see the 3-node cluster is ready. And if I do kubectl get pods, we'll be also seeing the applications that we installed, which is traffic and the cert manager. So both these applications are also installed onto the cluster and ready to be used. Now I have already cloned the repository, and you need Waypoint CLI if you remember the architecture. So I already have Waypoint installed onto this particular system. So what next you have to do is you need to install the server components onto the platform. So we'll be using again Waypoint CLI. So we'll be using Waypoint install, and we'll accept the TOC, terms of conditions. And then we'll be giving the platform as Kubernetes. So this will be installing Waypoint components onto the Kubernetes cluster using the exported kubeconfig variable so that it can connect to the right cluster. So meanwhile, this is getting installed. Let's switch to another tab and export the kubeconfig because we need to create some of the Kubernetes resources, if you remember. So you can see we got cluster issuer. So let's look at what cluster issuer is. So you can see it's cluster issuer. It has the let's encrypt certificate, email, and with the solvers as HTTP01 and ingress class as traffic. So we have created the kubectl apply -f cluster issuer. Your SRE team can do that. And the next one would be the certificate, but for the certificate, we need the domain, the DNS for the load balancer of traffic. So we'll grab it quickly. You can grab it from the CO CLI or the UI, anything is fine, but you just need the proper DNS for your traffic load balancer. In the certificate, we have the secret name workshop, and we have the common name and DNS for which we actually are requesting the certificate from the let's encrypt. So we give that Waypoint and we give the DNS name, and then we apply this certificate as well onto the Kubernetes cluster. Now, if we go back, we should be able to see that Waypoint is installed successfully. It is ready. It has, I think, all the server connections, and the runner is running. and it has the context created install with some generated digit, and you can see the UI address for that, which you can hit and see the UI. So let's go to the UI and hit the UI to access Waypoint. In order to access Waypoint, you can either do it by the authenticate using the token or the OIDC. For this demo, let's use the Waypoint token. So the token is generated, and we'll be using this token. Let's paste it, authenticate it, and this is the Waypoint UI, which is the plain UI right now because nothing is there. Now let's go back. I told you we need to create the role and the role binding so that the service account of Waypoint can have the access to the secrets, because we are using some of the secrets which we'll be creating a bit later. So these are the service account, and we'll be creating a role and the role bindings for these service accounts to have access to the secrets. So when we do a cat on the role, you can see the name, you can see the resources, secrets, and we want the get watch list of that. I'll be just giving it to, I think, all in the role binding to all the service account. So we do kubectl create role, kubectl create role binding, and we can also see the role binding. It is there with the role reference to the get secrets and with the subjects as the service accounts that we have just seen. Let's go back and create the project. So we need the name, obviously, and we'll be connecting the project to the repository, and we'll be using the GitHub. So we just copy this, grab this URL, and we paste that in the Waypoint UI. So we paste the GitHub URL, we give the branch reference, which is the main branch, and then we give the authentication. Now you can put the Waypoint file in the server or in the from the repository itself. But since we need to change some of the things, so we'll be using server for this particular case. So let's copy that and paste it and go through the Waypoint HCL file. So you can see the project is workshops, and in the configuration, we have internal where we have defined config dynamic Kubernetes, which means it is reading from Kubernetes secrets. So there should be a secret with the name of stripe key and the key as the proper key for that stripe, and then the public key for stripe with the secret name of that. And we'll be using all these in the environment variable as config.internal.pubkey, config.internal.key. So you can see all these are being used inside the environment variables, because in the application, if you remember server.js, we were using these. Again, the domain we need to change. That's why I was saying we need to change some of the things inside the waypoint.htcl file. So I'm changing the domain to the load balancer of DNS name for the load balancer of traffic. And I think there will be one more secret which is there, which is the password. Yeah, so there's one more secret password for the Docker registry, which is there, where we want to push our artifact to. So let's go ahead actually and create those secrets, because we haven't created the secrets till now. So let's create kubectl create secret generic demo type string from literal with the password, and then again the stripe key with the literal as key. So that matches exactly with what we have defined in the configuration in the waypoint.htcl file. And the third one is create the pub key, and you can again see the pub key matches the name. If you go above, it matches the name in the pub key and the key as pub. So these are the three secrets that we have created. Now we'll go back, and I think our waypoint.htcl file is complete till here. Now let's go back. This is our application. Now we define the build stanza, and we want to use pack. We want to use build packs. In the registry, we are using Docker. We have defined the image to be used. We have defined the username, the password from the above variables which are there. And then we have the deploy to Kubernetes with service port as 3000. And then we have release. We want ingress, and we have given TLS because we want HTTPS, and we have given the certificate secret name, which we defined in the certificate file as workshop. So we have given those. So this is a kind of practical scenario where you'll be having HTTPS getting connected to Stripe and things like that. And obviously for the host, we need to give the proper DNS name. So I have copied back again from the CO UI. You can again use CO, CLI, UF, whatever you want. So now our Waypoint HCL file looks good. You can see that I can describe the file within a few minutes and it's there. So you can either use Waypoint up command from the CLI or let the project configuration finish, and you can only use the UI for deploying the application. So you can see the project is there, the deploy and release, you can click that button and it will start referencing the main branch, starting the build. So if you go to the builds, you will be seeing that a build already has started with build packs. So the build, it's building with pack. So it is building the artifact, which will then be deployed, then be pushed to the registry with the credentials that you have provided. So it is now deploying, and after that it is releasing. And if you again go back to the demo, you will be able to see the deployment is completed, the pods are created, the ingress and the service, all the Kubernetes components are created. So you can click the pod, you can see the JSON that is being applied onto the cluster and all the fancy things which is there. If you go to the release page, you will be able to see the release already happened and we already have the URL which we have given in the domain. And hooray, our application is deployed. So Cube Simplify workshops are deployed and it's HTTPS, it's secure. We can actually test the Stripe integration. So let's click on the register now for one of the workshops. Let's fill in the details for this and all the other fields, phone numbers, designation, just random things. And once we proceed to checkout, you can see it went to Stripe. So obviously this is a test because I showed you my public and private key. So it's a test account which is there with Stripe, but you can test that by giving a random, not the random email. Yeah, you can give, and the random card information and all the dummy information. And once you click process, it's complete. So you have deployed successfully your application using Waypoint with HTTP TLS, Stripe integration, a proper working use case, which is there, and you have deployed it on Kubernetes with limited steps, with not interacting with Kubernetes at all. That is where the power of Waypoint comes. You can see the kubectl get pods. You can see the pod running over there. You can see the tasks, some of the tasks which are there. I'm not sure why they're not getting cleaned up. Then you can also see the ingress that got created. So visiting back the Waypoint HCL file, you have the configuration where you have defined variables that have been used as environment variables inside the code. Then you have some variables that are used inside the Waypoint file. Then you have build, deploy, and the release stanzas which are there for this particular file. So that's pretty much it that I have for this particular demo. And the only thing I want you to take away from this session is that Waypoint is a tool focusing on the build, deploy, release. It has some scenarios that it can be used in for today, just like I showed you. It is an actual scenario that is being deployed, and the Stripe integration, everything works, and you won't see any secrets anywhere in the logs because we have masked everything. So thank you so much for attending this session, and I hope you learned something about Waypoint today, where you can use it, where you actually kind of cannot use it, or in the complex pipeline ecosystem, stateful sets and things like that, where your other infrastructure teams and the security teams can come in and help you, and all three of you can create an internal developer Mini-PaaS that can give the developers only the templates that they need to use with limited access to the Kubernetes resources, and they should be able to deploy the application to a certain stage. So I think that's where Waypoint is powerful, and the team is fantastic, very supportive. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me or the Waypoint team. You can find me in this jacket, not very hard to find, today and tomorrow, and I'll be happy to answer any questions to the best of my knowledge with respect to cloud, Kubernetes, and Waypoint. So thank you so much for attending the session.